Good evening, Fight Owls, and welcome to Live Dogs Breakdown, where we take a closer look at betting underdogs who have the best chance of upsetting the bookmakers. This week we have 3 picks from the very stacked UFC 259. Going from the top to the bottom of the card, we begin with the main event, Jan Blachowicz defending his title against Isreal Adesanya. Despite Jan being the champion, he's coming in as a 15-8 underdog, and Isreal coming in as a 2-5 favourite in the fight. However, Jan is no stranger to being the underdog, as he was when he captured the title against Dominick. I'm actually a little surprised the betting lines aren't a little closer for this one, considering Jan has a bad habit of badly introducing middleweights with disappointing moves up to light heavyweight, as he did for Luke Rockhold, another one where he was a betting underdog by the way, and Jacare Souza, and same here again with Isreal Adesanya. An even bigger surprise is if you look at the betting line for each of the fighters winning by knockout. Again, Izzy is the favourite here. Yes, I can see why that may be considering he's the more elite striker, but considering Jan is known for his one-punch knockout power, compared to Isreal's TKO power and knockdown power, Jan is still the underdog when it comes to who's more likely to win by knockout. A very surprising one for me there. What isn't surprising for me, however, is the difference within their styles. Although again, I think Jan is still being underestimated, same as he was against Dominick. He is a lot more than just Polish power. In order for his hands to land on you in the first place, a lot of good footwork he uses, distant management, he sets traps really well. Now if we're comparing him against Adesanya, probably not as elite in that area. However, looking at Jan as a whole fighter, he is much more complete as an MMA fighter. He really does a good job of mixing in his takedowns, whereas Isreal, we have seen him on the ground, especially against Kevin Gastelum, when they got to the ground and Isreal pulled up that really nice triangle out of nowhere. I think a lot of people were surprised by that, especially Calvin, because we really hadn't seen much of Israel's ground game until that moment. Even though it wasn't very long, but that was enough to show that he's a much better grappler than people think he is just because he comes from kickboxing. But Jan is one of these guys you would call a complete MMA fighter. He has an all-round game. He's not just a striker. He likes to mix things up quite well, so I think that would be a really good way to keep Izzy guessing. Especially if he can get to a point where he can get Adesanya fearing takedowns. That way he can take advantage of that and start mixing in with strikes. Kind of like the way how Khabib managed to knock down Conor in that 4th round. Conor was so scared of the takedown coming that when Khabib launched in, you could see Conor's hands kind of come down to catch an underhook on Khabib shooting in for a takedown, but then a punch came over that knocked Conor down instead. So if Jan can implement something similar to that, Izzy could get into quite a bit of trouble, especially as we know it only takes one shot for Jan. I do expect this to be quite a slow fight to begin with, especially those first 1-2 rounds while they're still feeling each other out. Jan isn't the type of guy to come out guns blazing like Thiago Santos style. And Izzy, as we know, he works better on the outside, countering very, very well. And interestingly, even though Adesanya is the one coming up weight, he's actually the taller fighter in this. Since Izzy is 6'4" and Jan is 6'2", it would work better in Adesanya's favour to keep that same game of his, staying on the outside and just picking shots anytime Jan tries to come in. This would be a much better fight for Jan if he can manage to find his way in, which I believe he can with his footwork. Very underrated footwork, in fact. If he can get in that close distance with Izzy, it's going to be a problem for him. The uglier Jan can make this, the better it will be for him, because he's technical enough not to fall for the counters that Paulo Costa fell for in their fight. And my god, talk about the body of work this guy has gone through. Everyone is talking about how Isreal Adesanya has gone through the who's who of the middleweight division, which he has, and well done to him. But talk about flying under the radar. I mean, Dominick, Corey Anderson, Jacare Souza, Luke Rockhold, Thiago Santos, Nikita Krylov, Jimmy Manuwa, and Jared Cannonier. His only loss between those guys was Thiago Santos. I mean, that is an impressive resume he's worked up for himself. And you can see how he's managed to be the light heavyweight, excuse me. He has definitely earned his spot. Alright, the next underdog to keep an eye on this card is Megan Anderson, who is a ridiculous 13-2 underdog, with Nunes unsurprisingly as a 1-12 favourite. Megan is the biggest underdog on this card by a long, long way. Rightly so, she is going up against the greatest women's MMA fighter of all time. At the moment anyway. I have my theories about who is going to surpass her in some years from now. Now, when it comes to individual facets of the MMA game, Amanda Nunes is actually quite overrated. I know I'm going to get into a bit of trouble for saying this, but if you look at her striking game, her wrestling game, her clinch game, her jiu-jitsu game, looking at them all separately, she's definitely not the best striker. Jermaine Durandamy is better than her. That's why she had to resort to desperate wrestling in their last fight. Go back and look at that second round against Jermaine. Amanda Nunes had no choice but to clinch with her and try to get her down to the ground, because GDR had Nunes in a lot of trouble in the feet in that fight. And looking at other facets of the game, I mean, we haven't really seen much of Nunes' jiu-jitsu game in a long time, since she was a young fighter. Which there's no doubt, of course she's improved massively since then. Even though she's not the best at all these different things, what she is the best at is putting everything together. I mean, that's what MMA is at the end of the day, and she does that very, very well, which is why she has cleaned out 2 divisions now. The reason I mention this is because she's going up against a 6-foot real featherweight in Megan Anderson. She's the biggest female fighter the UFC has ever seen, and it's quite surprisingly she manages to make 145. She's a very long girl, long legs, and she knows how to use her reach very, very well. And as well as Nunes, they are both power punchers. They both knock girls out cold. So I'm very, very excited for this one, because Megan has a real opportunity to show the world what she's made of. Because she absolutely has the potential to knock Nunes out cold. And Nunes also has the potential to knock Megan out cold, which makes this fight very, very interesting to me. And one thing I love about Megan, back when Holly Holm beat her very, very dominantly, at that time it was kind of set that Holly had set the blueprint on how to beat Anderson. Even in her next fight, when she fought Felicia Spencer, she also managed to ragdoll her way through her on the ground. The reason why I love that happened to her, because we saw in her next fight after that, the next opponent tried to do the same thing. They all looked at those 2 fights and thought, oh, the best way to beat Megan is just take her down to the ground. The reason why I can see Megan beating Nunes is because of that next fight. She learnt her weaknesses and she worked on them. She knew that was a big hole in the game and she worked on it hard. The next girl who tried to take her down, she submitted her. Mind you, she wasn't the same caliber as Felicia Spencer or Amanda Nunes on the ground. But I love that. That's a hole that Megan saw in herself and said, okay, I'm going to work on this. Next person who tries this on me, I'm going to make them regret it. And she did. Now, looking at the team Amanda trains at, American Top Team, they are very, very good game planners. And although at times some of Amanda's previous performances have seemed a little dull, that's because she listens to what her team tells her. They work out a very good game plan for the opponent, and she implements it very well when those cage doors close. Considering Megan is well known for her punching power, I mean, the majority of her wins have come by knockout. I would give it about 30 seconds before we see Amanda shooting for a takedown. And if Anderson and her team have also strategized well, they will know that's going to be coming and they will be ready for that. Just look back a few weeks ago when Corey Sandhagen kneed Frankie Edgar, or most famously when Jorge Masvidal gave the knee to Ben Askren. They knew those takedowns were coming. Corey Sandhagen was ready for Frankie to level change onto his knee. Guys, I would not be surprised at all if that's the same thing Megan and her team have been working on this training camp. Especially considering Megan's very, very long legs. it wouldn't take much propelling for her to get the power on her knees to meet Amanda Nunes as she's level changing. Nunes has to be very, very careful for that. And even if Amanda manages to get her down to the ground, with those long limbs of Megan, it will be very easy for her to throw up some kind of triangle and maybe use that to get back to her feet if it doesn't work. Guys, this is a much closer fight than people realize. And it's shocking to me that Megan is this much of an underdog. Some people out there are gonna make a lot of money if she wins. Okay, the final underdog pick for you on this card is the featured prelim with Dominick Cruz against Kenney. Now, Kenney is currently an unranked fighter hoping to get a number next to his name if he wins. A young guy who's on the rise against a 35-year-old Dominick Cruz who a lot of people are already counting out. Now, this always happens whenever someone has 1 or 2 losses. The MMA community seems to have such an incredibly short memory. Although Cruz is only an ever so slight underdog, he still is the underdog, which makes no sense. I mean, this guy is still the greatest bantamweight of all time. When he was in his prime, going up against an unranked guy and he's still the underdog. That makes no sense to me. I know they both seem to be going in opposite directions. Kenney has picked up good wins in his past few fights, whereas Dominick Cruz is coming off 2 losses. Understandable, but look who Cruz lost to. And look who Kenney has beaten. And the level of competition is nowhere near the same. Nowhere near. As inactive as Dominick Cruz has been, he has seen all sides of the game from the most elite fighters. There is nothing Kenney is going to throw at him in there that Dominick Cruz hasn't seen already. And the fact that this is the first 3-round fight Dominick Cruz has had since his fight many years ago when he knocked out Takeya Mizugaki. With all the injuries Cruz has been through, I can imagine training for a 3-round fight instead of 5 has been a blessing to his body. He can also afford to push the pace quite a bit as well to test the young guy coming up to see what he's made of. Even though Cruz generally has very good cardio anyway, even in the late 5-round fights, he can definitely amp it up a bit more in this one to test the young guy who's never been there before. I do think this fight will go the distance, and honestly I think this is an absolute steal for the bookies and for Dominick Cruz to have his "y'all must have forgot who I was" moment. Let me know in the comment section below which underdog you think has the best chance of winning. It is a ridiculously stacked card and I'm super excited. I hope you guys enjoy the fights. And give this video a like if you enjoy the betting breakdowns.